On January 17th, 2008, a 21-year-old mother named Denise Amber Lee vanished from her own home in Florida while her two small children were left alone inside. Hours later, a terrified woman secretly called 911 from the back seat of her kidnapper's moving car. Blindfolded and fighting for her life, Denise tried to give dispatchers clues without alerting the man sitting beside her. Multiple witnesses reported hearing screams. Police helicopters searched the area. 911 operators received call after call. Yet somehow nobody reached her in time. What happened to Denise Amber Lee would later expose one of the most disturbing emergency response failures in America and reveal the unbelievable courage of a young mother who continued fighting until her very last breath. The first thing the dispatcher noticed was the breathing, fast, shaking, uneven. Then came the traffic noise, cars rushing past, a blinker ticking somewhere close. And underneath all of it, a young woman trying desperately not to sound afraid. Please, please God, please protect me. Her voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. Not because she was crying, because someone was sitting right beside her. A man, angry, breathing heavily, yelling at her to shut up. The dispatcher straightened in her chair. Something was wrong, very wrong. The call had come in just after sunset on January 17th, 2008. Florida, the road still crowded. The air warm enough for car windows to stay cracked open. At first, it almost sounded like a domestic argument. A terrified woman rambling. A controlling husband nearby. Nothing unusual. Then the dispatcher heard it. The panic hidden underneath Denise's voice. Not loud panic. Controlled panic. The kind that sounds rehearsed because survival depends on it. My name is Denise, she said loudly. Not to the dispatcher. To the man beside her. At least, that's how she wanted it to sound. The dispatcher asked where she was. Denise answered without answering. I just want to go home. A pause. Please take me back to my house. Then she gave her full address. Smoothly, carefully, like someone threading a needle while blindfolded. The dispatcher's stomach dropped. This wasn't a domestic dispute. This woman was being taken somewhere. And she was trying to leave breadcrumbs before she disappeared forever. Outside the moving car, headlights streaked past in blurred lines of white and red. Inside, Denise Amber Lee sat blindfolded, her hands bound, a gun somewhere close enough that she could probably feel it every time the car hit a bump in the road. Yet somehow, impossibly, she stayed calm enough to think, to strategize, to survive. Every sentence she spoke had two meanings. One for the dispatcher. One for the man kidnapping her. I'm married to a beautiful husband. Translation. I have a family. People are looking for me. I just want to see my kids again. Translation. Please hurry. He's going to kill me. The dispatcher tried tracing the signal. Tried keeping her talking. Tried pulling details from fragmented whispers and coded phrases while the car kept moving to the Florida darkness. Then Denise said the word please again, and again, and again, 17 times in less than 7 minutes. Not dramatic pleading. Desperate human instinct. The kind that comes out when someone realizes death is getting closer mile by mile. And the horrifying part? She wasn't alone. Not really. As Denise secretly begged for help from the back seat of that moving Camaro, people were already searching for her. Police helicopters were in the air. Patrol units were scanning roads. Officers were racing through neighborhoods only miles away. They just didn't know where to look. Not yet. A woman at a nearby stoplight would soon hear screaming from a passing car. Another witness had already seen Denise trying to escape. A father was tearing apart his house looking for his missing wife. And somehow, none of it was connecting. The information existed. The clues existed. The victim herself was literally calling 911 during her own kidnapping. And still, the system was failing in real time. The dispatcher asked another question. Denise answered too quickly this time. The man beside her noticed. His voice exploded in the background. What are you doing? The line crackled violently. Heavy movement. A muffled scream. Then silence. Dead air. The call disconnected. For several seconds. The dispatcher just stared at the screen, because deep down she already knew. If they didn't find that car immediately, the young mother on the other end of that phone was going to die. What nobody understood yet was that Denise Amber Lee had already done something extraordinary. Blindfolded, terrified, possibly injured, she had just handed police the identity of her killer. But by the time dispatch fully realized what was happening, Denise Amber Lee was already disappearing into the dark. At first glance, Denise Amber Lee's life looked painfully ordinary, and maybe that's what makes what happened to her so terrifying, because there were no warning signs, no dark alley, no dangerous lifestyle, no secret enemies hiding in the shadows. Just a 21-year-old mother living in a quiet Florida neighborhood, trying to build a future before adulthood had even fully started, long before the police helicopters, before the screaming 911 calls, before one of the worst emergency response failures in modern American history. There was simply Denise, a young woman with a loud laugh, restless energy, and the kind of warmth that made people feel safe around her almost instantly. She met Nathan Lee when she was still a teenager. Young love, fast love, the kind adults usually warn you about. But for Denise and Nathan, everything seemed to move at full speed from the very beginning. Friends later said they acted less like a new couple and more like two people who had somehow known each other forever. They were inseparable within months. Nathan bought her a tiny heart-shaped ring during their first Valentine's Day together. It cost barely anything. Cheap metal, small stone, nothing expensive. Denise treated it like it was priceless. She wore it every single day. Even years later, after 2 pregnancies, sleepless nights, overdue bills, and the chaos of early marriage, that little ring never left her finger. It became part of her. By 21, Denise was already raising 2 small boys. Most people her age were still figuring out college classes and weekend plans. Denise was changing diapers at 3 a.m., washing bottles, falling asleep halfway through conversations because motherhood had consumed every inch of her life. And somehow, she still made it look easy. Neighbors remembered hearing her laugh outside while carrying one baby on her hip and chasing the other through the yard. She looked exhausted most days, but happy, genuinely happy. There was something unusually trusting about the life they built in Northport, Florida. It was a kind of neighborhood where people waved from driveways without really knowing each other's names, where kids played outside until sunset, where doors stayed unlocked because nobody imagined evil could quietly walk into a place like that. And Denise believed that too, at least for a while. Still, there was another side to her most people never saw. Denise wasn't naive. Her father, Rick Goff, worked in law enforcement for years. Growing up around detectives changed the way she saw the world. She understood danger, predators, manipulation, the small behavioral signs most people ignored. She knew bad people rarely look dangerous at first. Sometimes they look polite, normal, forgettable. That knowledge made her cautious in ways other young mothers weren't. She checked locks constantly, paid attention to strange cars, noticed when someone drove too slowly through the neighborhood. And strangely enough, people would later wonder if Denise sensed something before the abduction ever happened, because in the days leading up to her disappearance, there were moments that felt unsettling in hindsight. A car scene lingering too long, an unfamiliar presence drifting through the neighborhood, tiny details nobody paid attention to at the time. Because why would they? Nothing about Denise Amber Lee's life looked like the beginning of a true crime documentary. That Thursday morning started like hundreds before it. Nathan left early for work. Denise stayed home with the boys. The weather was unusually warm for January, and sometime before noon, Nathan called home during a break. Just a normal conversation between exhausted young parents. Bills, the kids, the heat outside. Nathan joked about saving money by turning off the air conditioning and opening the windows. Denise laughed and told him she already had, that the breeze felt nice. It was such a small moment, so ordinary, the kind of memory most people would forget within hours. Instead, Nathan would replay that conversation in his mind for the rest of his life, because that was the last time he ever heard his wife's voice when she wasn't afraid. Somewhere nearby, someone else was already watching. Watching the house. Watching the routine. Watching Nathan leave for work every morning. Watching Denise stay behind alone with 2 small children. And whoever that person was, they understood something terrifying. In neighborhoods where people feel safest, they stop expecting evil to knock first. Hours later, someone would walk through that unlocked door. At some point that afternoon, the neighborhood stopped feeling normal. Nobody realized it then. That's the terrifying part, because evil rarely announces itself when it arrives. Sometimes it just drives slowly past your house, over and over again, until somebody finally notices. A woman named Jennifer Ecker would later remember sitting inside her home watching television when something outside her window kept pulling her attention away from the screen. A green Camaro, older model, dark windows. It rolled down the street once. Then again. At first, it didn't feel dangerous, just strange. Northport wasn't the kind of place where random cars cruise neighborhoods for no reason. People recognized each other there. Traffic felt familiar, predictable. This car wasn't. Jennifer watched the Camaro pass the same houses repeatedly, almost like the driver was searching for something, or someone, inside the Lee family home. Denise had no idea anyone was watching. Her focus was entirely on the children. One baby needed feeding. The other needed constant attention. Toys scattered across the living room floor, while warm air drifted through the open windows Nathan had asked her to open earlier that morning. Everything about the scene felt painfully domestic. Safe. The kind of ordinary moment nobody realizes they'll someday replay in nightmares. Outside, the Camaro returned again. Slow, patient, like the driver was building confidence with every pass. And behind the wheel sat a man whose own life was collapsing in slow motion. Michael King was 36 years old, recently divorced, unemployed, financially drowning. His home sat on the edge of foreclosure, while unpaid bills piled around him like physical evidence of failure. People who knew him later described a man unraveling quietly beneath the surface, detached, unstable, frustrated with the world. But what made Michael King truly dangerous wasn't rage. It was calculation, because something about that house had captured his attention long before he ever stepped inside. Investigators would later believe this wasn't random. Not completely. The timing felt too deliberate. Nathan gone for work. Young mother alone. Quiet neighborhood. Unlocked doors. Michael King kept circling, because predators study comfort before they attack it. They look for routines, weaknesses, moments where safety creates blindness. And Denise's home looked easy. Inside the house, Denise probably heard cars passing occasionally outside the windows and thought nothing of it. Why would she? Nobody expects the worst version of humanity to pull into their driveway on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Then the Camaro slowed again. This time it didn't keep driving. Jennifer watched the vehicle pull directly into the Lee family driveway. That was the moment her uneasiness sharpened into something heavier, because the driver didn't look confused. He didn't hesitate. He parked like he belonged there. Michael King stepped out calmly. No panic. No rushing, just quiet confidence, the kind that only comes from someone who has already decided what's about to happen. He walked toward the house while the neighborhood sat frozen in normal afternoon silence. Children playing somewhere in the distance, dogs barking, wind moving through trees, and a predator approaching an unlocked front door. Inside, Denise was only a few feet away, completely unaware, maybe holding one of the boys. Maybe cleaning bottles. Maybe thinking about dinner later that night. Her entire future still existed in that moment. Then Michael King reached the door. No forced entry. No shattered glass. No warning. He simply turned the handle. And the door opened. For a split second, the house remained quiet. Then something changed inside. Something nobody outside could fully see yet. Jennifer would later say she felt an overwhelming instinct that something wasn't right. But instincts are strange things. People doubt them, rationalize them, convince themselves they're overreacting, because the alternative is too horrifying to accept. A few minutes passed. The neighborhood stayed silent. No screams, no gunshots, No chaos spilling into the street. Only that green Camaro waiting patiently in the driveway beneath the Florida sun. And somewhere inside the house, Denise Amber Lee's life was being ripped apart in complete silence. Less than 30 minutes later, she was gone. Nathan Lee knew something was wrong before he even stepped inside the house. At first, it was just a feeling, a small shift in the atmosphere, the kind of instinct people ignore every day because most fears turn out to be nothing. This one didn't. He had been trying to call Denise for several minutes with no answer. That alone was unusual. Denise almost always picked up, even if she was busy with the kids. And if she missed a call, she called back fast. This time, nothing. No voicemail. No text. Just silence. The deeper Nathan drove into the neighborhood, the more that silence started pressing against his chest. When he finally pulled into the driveway, something immediately fell off. The house looked wrong. Not damaged. Not chaotic. Just wrong. The windows were closed now. Earlier that day, Denise had opened them to let cool air move through the house. Nathan remembered joking with her about saving money on electricity. It was one of the last normal conversations they would ever have. Now every window was shut tight. The front door was locked too. That stopped him cold. Denise rarely locked the door in the middle of the day, especially when she was home with the boys. Nathan knocked first, then harder. Denise? Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Only a strange silence sitting behind the walls. The kind of silence that makes your brain start imagining terrible things before your heart is ready to accept them. He unlocked the door himself and stepped inside. Immediately, the air felt heavy. Still, almost abandoned. The television was on somewhere in the background, filling the house with soft, meaningless noise. But Denise was nowhere to be seen. Then Nathan heard the children. One of the boys was crying softly. The other sat alone nearby. No adult voice comforting them. No mother rushing into the room. Just two babies sitting inside a quiet house by themselves. Nathan's panic sharpened instantly. He moved through the rooms faster now, calling Denise's name louder each time. Kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, nothing. Then he started noticing the details. Her purse was still inside. Her cigarettes. Her keys. Most disturbing of all, her phone. Denise never went anywhere without her phone. Not with two children. Not without telling someone. And definitely not barefoot. But there were no shoes missing either. It looked less like Denise had left the house, and more like she had been interrupted in the middle of living her normal life. That realization hit Nathan all at once. Something had happened here. Something bad. Something fast. His breathing changed. People later described Nathan's 911 call as immediate panic. There was no delay, no hesitation. Somewhere deep down, he already understood this wasn't a misunderstanding or a voluntary disappearance. His wife was gone, and she hadn't left willingly. What Nathan didn't know yet was that Denise's father had spent years in law enforcement. The moment word reached him, instincts took over. This wasn't treated like an ordinary missing person case. Police moved fast, very fast. Units flooded the area almost immediately. Helicopters launched into the darkening Florida sky. Detectives began retracing timelines before the sun had even fully disappeared. Neighbors were questioned, road scanned, vehicles checked, and for a brief moment, investigators believed speed might save her, because somewhere out there, Denise was still alive. That's what makes this case so haunting. The rescue effort had already begun while she was still fighting. While officers searched neighborhoods and helicopters swept over roads, Denise Amber Lee was trapped only miles away. Terrified, bound, inside a place investigators would later describe as prepared. A room Michael King had already filled with restraints and supplies before he ever walked into her home, which raised an even darker possibility. This may not have been impulsive at all, because predators like Michael King don't always explode into violence suddenly. Sometimes they fantasize first, plan first, study first, and the deeper investigators looked into his life, the more unsettling the pattern became. Unemployment, financial collapse, divorce, isolation, a man quietly losing control over every part of his world, until he finally chose someone else to control instead. And while Nathan tore through the house looking for signs of where Denise went, she was already enduring horrors nobody could yet imagine. At some point during those first hours, Denise realized something terrifying. Nobody knew where she was. Not exactly. Not yet. And if she wanted to survive, she might have to save herself. Back at the house, officers kept searching for evidence that could point them somewhere concrete. But the home itself almost seemed frozen in time. Half-finished routines. Children's toys scattered across the floor. Normal life interrupted in mid-sentence. The scene disturbed investigators deeply because it carried the unmistakable feeling of sudden violence without visible violence. No shattered windows. No blood everywhere. No signs of prolonged struggle. Just absence. And sometimes absence is more terrifying than destruction, because the mind fills silence with possibilities far worse than anything visible. Outside, darkness slowly settled across Northport. Streetlights flickered on. Neighbors watched flashing police lights from behind curtains. Rumors spread quietly from driveway to driveway. Young mother missing. Children found alone. Possible abduction. And somewhere beyond the reach of those helicopters, Denise Amber Lee was fighting for her life only miles away. The room felt wrong long before investigators ever saw it. That's how survivors describe places built for fear. Not loud, not chaotic, just wrong. The air feels heavier somehow. The silence unnatural. Every object inside carrying the uncomfortable feeling that it was placed there for a reason. By the time detectives finally uncovered what Michael King had prepared before abducting Denise Amber Lee, the case stopped looking like a random act of violence. It became something colder, more deliberate, because hidden inside that room were signs that suggested this nightmare may have started long before King ever walked through Denise's front door. Restraints, supplies, items investigators believed had been gathered ahead of time, not improvised, prepared, and that realization changed everything. Predators driven by sudden rage don't usually prepare environments. They react, explode, lose control. Michael King looked disturbingly different. Controlled, organized, patient, which meant Denise may have been trapped inside the fantasies of a man who had already imagined this crime long before it happened. Inside that room, time began to distort. Minutes felt longer, sound sharper. Every movement mattered. Denise was blindfolded for portions of the ordeal, but blindness didn't stop her mind from working. If anything, it sharpened it. She started listening, really listening. Footsteps, doors opening, the sound of objects being moved, the direction of his voice, the moments when his breathing changed, the moments when his mood changed, because Denise understood something terrifying almost immediately. Panic alone would not save her. And somewhere beneath the fear, another instinct started taking over. The detective's daughter. People later called her brave, heroic. But bravery wasn't what kept her mentally alive inside that room. It was adaptation. Denise began studying Michael King the same way investigators study suspects. Quietly, carefully, she memorized words he repeated, tried estimating distance every time he moved around the room, listened for traffic outside. Dogs barking, airplanes overhead, anything that could help her understand where she was, where he was taking her, whether escape was even possible. That psychological shift may have been the single most extraordinary part of the entire case, because many victims psychologically collapse once they realize rescue isn't immediate. Denise did the opposite. The more isolated she became, the more observant she became. And Michael King almost certainly underestimated her because of it. That's what predators often misunderstand. They expect fear to erase intelligence. But fear can also sharpen survival instincts into something terrifyingly focused, especially in people who refuse to mentally surrender. Still, the psychological horror inside that room kept escalating. King controlled everything. The light, the movement, the uncertainty. Sometimes he talked too much. Sometimes he went silent for long stretches that forced Denise to sit alone with her own thoughts. And silence became its own form of torture, because the human mind fills quiet with possibilities. How long had he planned this? Had he watched her before today? Were her children safe? Did Nathan know she was missing yet? Was anyone searching for her? At some point, Denise likely realized the most devastating truth of all. She might not survive this. That realization breaks most people. For Denise, it appeared to create clarity instead, because investigators would later uncover evidence suggesting she never stopped thinking ahead, never stopped calculating, never stopped looking for opportunities, even while terrified, even while trapped. And Michael King kept making one critical mistake. He underestimated how mentally present she still was. He saw a frightened young mother. He failed to recognize someone actively gathering information against him in real time, someone memorizing his routines, his carelessness, his patterns. And the strange thing about predators is that once they start feeling powerful, they usually become less cautious, more comfortable, more arrogant. Michael King began moving around Denise with increasing confidence, convinced he had complete control over the situation. But total control creates blind spots, and Denise was waiting for one. Then it happened, a tiny mistake. So small Michael King probably didn't even think about it afterward. For a few seconds, he left Denise alone. And those few seconds would change everything. By the time Michael King pulled into his cousin's driveway, Denise Amber Lee had already been fighting for hours. Fighting to stay calm. Fighting to stay alive. Fighting against the growing realization that every passing minute was carrying her farther away from rescue. But somewhere during that drive, something shifted. Maybe King became careless. Maybe exhaustion made him overconfident. Or maybe Denise simply recognized the smallest opening and decided it was worth dying for. Because suddenly, the car door flew open. Denise exploded out of Camaro, blindfolded, barefoot, duct tape still hanging from her wrists, screaming, not the controlled fear from the 911 call, not coded survival language, raw panic, the kind that tears itself out of a human body when survival becomes pure instinct. Help me, please help me. He kidnapped me. Her voice ripped through the quiet neighborhood like an alarm finally going off too late. Inside the nearby house, Harold Goff heard the screaming immediately. At first, it sounded unreal, like an argument, chaos, confusion. Then he stepped outside and saw her, a terrified young woman stumbling blindly through the yard with tape around her wrists while a man chased after her. For one split second, Harold froze. And that single moment would haunt this case forever, because Denise wasn't vague about what was happening. She begged directly, repeatedly, desperately. She screamed that she had been kidnapped, that she needed help, that the man chasing her was going to kill her. Everything about the scene should have triggered immediate action. But trauma researchers later pointed to something deeply uncomfortable about human psychology. People often hesitate during extreme situations precisely because reality feels too horrifying to process quickly. The brain searches for alternative explanations first. Domestic dispute, drug situation, misunderstanding, anything except the terrifying truth standing directly in front of them. And Michael King understood that hesitation instinctively. That's what made him so dangerous. Even in chaos, he manipulated perception. Witnesses later said he moved toward Denise aggressively but spoke with forced calmness, trying to frame the situation like some kind of mental breakdown or family conflict. Not a kidnapping, not an abduction, not the nightmare it actually was. And for a few devastating seconds, confusion won. Denise kept screaming, begging, crying, tried to pull away while still partially restrained and blindfolded. But panic and adrenaline were destroying her balance. She could barely see, barely orient herself. Every direction probably felt wrong. Then Michael King caught her. The sound witnesses remembered most wasn't the screaming. It was the desperation inside the screaming. The absolute certainty in Denise's voice that if nobody stopped this man right now, she was going to die. Harold later admitted he didn't fully understand what he was witnessing until it was already over. That's the tragedy of near-rescue moments. People imagine heroism happening instantly. In reality, terror creates confusion first, and predators depend on that confusion. Denise fought with everything left inside her, while King dragged her back toward the Camaro, a young mother, barefoot in the dirt, trying not to disappear. Again. Then something extraordinary happened. In the middle of the struggle, Denise noticed King's phone. Maybe it slipped partially from his pocket. Maybe it fell during the chaos. Investigators would later piece together only fragments of the moment, but somehow, while being forced back into the vehicle, Denise stole it. And Michael King never realized. That single act reveals something astonishing about her mental state. Most victims in extreme terror focus only on immediate survival. Denise was still thinking strategically, still adapting, still searching for ways to leave evidence behind. Even while physically overpowered, she concealed the phone quietly once King shoved her back inside the car, and then the Camaro pulled away. Just like that, the near rescue was over. The neighborhood fell silent again. Only now the silence felt sickening, because a woman had practically escaped death in front of witnesses, and still vanished. Harold stood frozen in the aftermath, trying to process what he had just seen. By the time reality fully settled in, Michael King and Denise Amber Lee were already disappearing down the road. And somewhere inside that moving car, Denise was bleeding, terrified, exhausted, but not broken, because now she had something Michael King didn't know about. A phone, a direct line to the outside world. The irony is almost unbearable. Police helicopters were already searching overhead. Patrol cars were flooding roads nearby. Detectives were racing against time. And the woman everyone was desperately trying to save was sitting only miles away beside her captor, secretly holding the very thing that could expose him, if she used it carefully enough, if she stayed alive long enough, if someone finally understood what they were hearing. Outside the car, Florida traffic kept moving normally through the fading daylight. Families headed home. Music played through open windows. Strangers unknowingly drove beside a kidnapped woman fighting for her life in the passenger seat of a green Camaro. And inside that vehicle, Denise Amber Lee made a decision that would transform this case forever. Bound, blindfolded, trapped inches away from the man who abducted her, Denise decided to call 911 herself. The phone line opens with a sound so ordinary it feels impossible that it will become the center of a national nightmare. A faint connection, a breath, static folding into silence. And then her voice, soft, controlled, almost careful in the way people speak when they are being watched without knowing how closely. Hello, I need help. The dispatcher responds immediately, trained calm cutting to the tension, asking what the emergency is. There's a pause just long enough to feel wrong. Because on the other end, Denise Williams is not alone, and she knows it. Her voice returns, slightly sharper now, but still carefully shaped. I'm Denise. She says it again, as if repetition can anchor her identity, as if, say, her own name might remind anyone, that she is a person, not just a voice inside a moving car. The dispatcher asks for location. Denise hesitates, then begins to construct the answer in fragments that sound almost meaningless unless you understand what she's doing. I'm near the highway. I think we just passed a sign for Lake Seminole. A pause, then quieter. Please. That word lands differently, not as a request, as a signal, a fracture in the performance. Because inside that car, every second is controlled by someone else. The man driving, calm, focused, listening, and Denise understands something terrifyingly precise. If she says too much, she dies, so she speaks in pieces. The dispatcher tries again. Ma'am, are you in a vehicle? Denise answers too quickly. Yes. Then she corrects herself gently, like she's afraid of being heard. Yes, I'm in a car with my husband. A deliberate word. Husband. Not captor, not suspect, not killer, because she is building a story the only way she can, one that won't trigger violence inside the car. Outside, traffic continues. Engines pass. No one knows that a woman is speaking to 911 in real time, her life balanced on every syllable. And then Denise does something even more dangerous. She says her name again. Denise Williams. Not for identity, for survival. As if repetition might somehow make it easier for the world to locate her. The dispatcher's tone shifts subtly now. The details are not fitting cleanly. The voice is too calm. The phrasing too controlled. Something is wrong, but not yet understood. In a patrol car miles away, officers are already moving. A vague call has been flagged. A possible distress situation near Lake Seminole. Nothing concrete. Nothing urgent enough to trigger full emergency interception. Just information. Not action. Not yet. Inside the Camaro, Denise adjusts her breathing. The phone is hidden, angled, pressed close enough to her face that every whisper risks exposure. The man beside her has not spoken much. That silence is worse than shouting, because silence means observation. Denise continues, "I'm trying to get home." A lie, but also a plea. The dispatcher asks for confirmation again. Location, direction, anything solid. Denise glances outward, memorizing what she can see without looking like she is memorizing anything at all. Trees, road curves, a distant sign she cannot read fully without turning her head too much. She answers carefully. "We're going toward Bainbridge." Another pause, then almost inaudible. "Please hurry." The word repeats again. Please, not as politeness, as survival code. At dispatch, confusion begins to spread. Two conflicting impressions collide. A calm caller providing partial information and subtle emotional fractures that suggest distress. The call is not clean enough to classify, not chaotic enough to escalate. It sits in the worst possible category, uncertain. Meanwhile, nearby witnesses are unknowingly stepping into the same timeline without realizing its importance. A driver notices a dark Camaro speeding slightly above traffic flow. Nothing unusual yet. Another sees a woman inside who appears tense, her posture rigid, her head angled forward as if listening to instructions no one else can hear. None of them connected to a 911 call in progress, because no alert has gone out, no description broadcast, no urgency shared. The system is still assembling the truth, and Denise is running out of time inside it. Back in the car, the captor adjusts his grip on the wheel. A subtle movement, a shift in awareness. Denise senses it immediately. Her voice changes, not louder, not panicked, but more precise. "I have 2 kids, she says suddenly. A calculated insertion. The dispatcher reacts instantly. "You have children with you?" Denise answers too quickly. No, they're not with me." Then softer, as if correcting herself emotionally rather than factually. "They're at home." Another pause, a dangerous one, because now the dispatcher hears it. The fracture widening. A mother, alone in a car, mentioning children, mentioning a husband, saying please too often, too evenly, and yet still no clear address. Still no direct confirmation of abduction, just fragments, always fragments. Outside, police units are now closer than anyone realizes. One vehicle is less than a few miles from the route Denise is traveling, close enough to intersect, close enough to end it, but they are moving blind. No license plate confirmed, no real-time GPS on the caller, no unified description circulating fast enough. The information exists. It just hasn't connected. And that gap, small, technical, invisible, is where everything is breaking. Denise tries again. "I think we're near a turnoff. I can see a water tower." Her voice tightens for a fraction of a second, because the captor has noticed her scanning the environment. A warning without words. She corrects herself mid-sentence. "Sorry, I can't see it clearly." Another "please" follows immediately after. Like a reflex, she cannot stop. Dispatch is now actively trying to triangulate location, but each new detail arrives too late, already replaced by motion. The car is moving faster than the system can interpret. And still, officers remain close enough that any slight deviation in direction could bring them face to face with the truth. A witness reports seeing a distressed woman in a Camaro near the highway's shoulder. The timing is almost perfect, the description almost enough, but it enters the system as secondary information, not priority, not yet connected to the ongoing call. Denise breathes shallowly. The line crackles. Her voice lowers again. "Please, I'm scared." The first direct emotional admission slips through. A mistake. Or Maybe the moment she can no longer fully control the performance. Dispatch immediately sharpens. Ma'am, I need you to tell me, are you in danger right now? A long silence. Inside the Camaro, the world tightens. Denise looks forward, does not turn her head, and answers in the most careful way she has spoken yet. I just want to go home. Not yes, not no, but everything in between. And that is when the dispatcher finally understands that this is not confusion. This is containment. Someone is listening. Someone is controlling. And the call that should have already triggered full emergency interception is still sitting in procedural delay, inches away from action that is not yet happening. The dispatcher begins to escalate internally, typing faster, voice shifting, trying to push urgency into a system that still demands confirmation. Outside, the Camaro continues forward. Inside, Denise repeats her name one last time. Denise Williams. Not as identity anymore, as a final anchor, a final signal. And in the distance, so close it feels almost cruel, another patrol unit adjusts its route, unknowingly aligning itself within minutes of interception. The gap between rescue and silence has never been smaller. And then another witness saw the screaming woman in the Camaro, and everything should have changed. 5 separate calls entered the system that night. 5 chances for the story to break open. 5 moments where everything could have shifted. And yet every single one slipped through the cracks of a system that was never built to see the whole picture at once. It begins at a traffic light. A woman named Jane Kowalski is waiting for it to turn green, when something inside the car beside her pulls her attention in a way she cannot ignore. The Camaro is idling slightly ahead, but what freezes her isn't the vehicle itself. It's the movement inside it. A woman's hand, slamming against a window. Once, then again, not waving, not signaling, pounding. Hard enough that Jane later describes the sound as something she felt more than heard. A blunt, desperate rhythm against glass. And then the face behind it, distorted, frantic, silent screaming. Jane doesn't understand what she is seeing. Not yet, but her body reacts before her mind does. She reaches for her phone. The call connects, but not where it should. It routes to the wrong county. A small digital decision, invisible to anyone in that moment, reroutes urgency into delay. Jane tries to explain through breathless urgency, but she is already speaking into the wrong room. The dispatcher hears concern, but not context. Location mismatch. Jurisdiction confusion. A problem to be transferred, not escalated. By the time the call begins to move, the Camaro is already gone, and Jane is left at the light, staring at empty space where panic used to be. She doesn't know it yet, but she has just seen a woman begging the world to notice her, and the world has already misplaced her. Minutes later, another call enters the system. A different voice, a different angle of the same nightmare. A man driving nearby reports a dark Camaro speeding erratically along a stretch of road near Lake Seminole. He mentions a woman inside who looks distressed, possibly in danger, but his description is incomplete, uncertain, framed as observation rather than emergency. The system labels it accordingly. Low priority, no immediate dispatch, no real-time link to Jane's call, no connection to Denise Williams speaking carefully into a hidden phone. 3 separate truths exist now in 3 separate places, and none of them are speaking to each other. Inside dispatch centers, screens light up and dim down as calls are entered, logged, transferred. Human urgency becomes structured data. Structured data becomes fragmented responsibility. And somewhere in that fragmentation, a woman is disappearing in real time. Then the 3rd call arrives. A family member of Harold, one of the men loosely connected to the unfolding situation. Calls in confusion. They've heard something strange, something urgent, something that doesn't fully make sense. A woman in distress. A possible emergency. A name that doesn't quite match official reports yet. The dispatcher listens, but there is no unified incident to attach it to. No confirmed abduction. No verified suspect description. Just another piece floating in isolation. The call is logged, not elevated. Outside, officers are already moving, but not together. One unit heads toward a location based on early fragments from Denise's 911 call. Another responds to the witness report from Jane, except it has been routed to the wrong sector entirely. A third is searching an area that no longer matches any active lead, because by the time they arrived, the Camaro had already moved miles away. They are all searching. They are just not searching the same truth. And that is what makes the failure so complete, because it is not absence of action. It is misaligned action. Fourth call, Harold himself. He calls anonymously at first, uncertainty threading through his voice. He has heard enough to know something is wrong, but not enough to understand what. His report overlaps partially with others, mentions of a suspicious vehicle, a possible abduction, something unfolding too quickly to track. The dispatcher attempts to piece it together, but the system still refuses to merge the fragments into a single emergency. Different jurisdictions, different logs, different timestamps, different interpretations of urgency. So Harold's call becomes another thread added to a knot that no one has yet realized is already tightening. And while those calls stack, something even more devastating is happening on the ground. A helicopter is deployed, but it is deployed to the wrong search grid. Not far off, close enough to feel like hope, far enough to miss everything that matters. From above, roads stretch like veins under dimming light. Cars move like small, indifferent signals. Somewhere within that movement, Denise is still alive, still speaking carefully, still trying to survive inside language itself. But the helicopter sees nothing that matches the scattered descriptions it has been given. No Camaro in the correct zone. No confirmed direction of travel. Just the illusion of coverage. Below, patrol units cross paths without realizing it. One vehicle turns off a road just as another enters it from the opposite direction. Minutes apart. Seconds in timing. Enough to matter. Not enough to connect. And the most horrifying truth begins to emerge through the chaos. Denise was never truly invisible. She was constantly seen. Just never assembled. Jane saw her at the light. A driver saw her on the highway. A dispatcher heard her voice in fragments. A helicopter passed above her general path. Multiple officers moved within minutes of her location, and yet every system interpreted her separately, like shattered glass held together by nothing but urgency. Inside the Camaro, Denise is still speaking into the phone she cannot show, cannot drop, cannot let be discovered. Outside, the world is full of people trying to help her, without realizing they are all looking at different versions of the same emergency. And that is where the tragedy sharpens into something almost unbearable. Because every call created momentum, and every system slowed it down. By the time the pieces begin to resemble a pattern, the pattern is already moving away from them. Jane's report is finally being reprocessed. Harold's call is being cross-referenced. The witness sighting is being reevaluated for urgency. The helicopter is adjusting its search grid. Officers are being rerouted, but none of it is synchronized. Everything is late. Everything is slightly off. Everything is chasing a version of the truth that is already shifting further down the road. And somewhere in that moving gap between information and action, the Camaro continues forward with a woman inside who has already told the world she is afraid in every careful word she was allowed to speak. The system is finally beginning to understand what it is dealing with. But understanding is not rescue. Not yet. And even after 5 separate calls, 5 separate warnings, 5 separate chances to break the chain of events, Denise Amber Lee was still alone with her killer. The air inside the Camaro changes long before anyone outside would notice. It becomes heavier, not physically, but in the way silence starts to feel like pressure, like something tightening slowly around time itself. Denise Williams stops speaking for a moment, not because the danger has passed, because something inside her has already accepted that it hasn't. She understands now what survival is becoming. Not escape, endurance. And somewhere between fear and calculation, a second awareness begins to take shape. If she does not make it out of this car alive, there must still be a trace of her left behind. Not memory, evidence. The kind that outlives silence. The kind that forces a truth to speak even when she can no longer do it herself. Her hands move subtly, carefully. Every gesture disguised as normal shifting in a passenger seat that is no longer safe. The man beside her is still driving, still watching, still listening in ways that do not require words. Denise lowers her gaze. A pause too controlled to be accidental. Then she begins. First, her hair. Small movements. Almost invisible. Fingers threading through strands as if she is simply adjusting herself, tired from the road. But each motion is deliberate. A few strands loosen. She gathers them slowly, carefully, without urgency. Not pulling. Not ripping. Leaving. She slides them into the seat crease beside her thigh, pushing them deeper where they will not be seen, where vacuuming, cleaning, forgetting cannot erase them easily. The act is so quiet it does not disturb the rhythm of the car. But inside her mind, it is a message being written into the environment itself. I was here. I existed here. And something happened to me here. Her breathing stays controlled, measured, almost calm. That calm is not peace. It is discipline under collapse. A second movement follows. Her hands brush her clothing, her pockets, searching not for safety, but for anything that can become proof. Then she finds it, a small object, a heart-shaped ring, something once symbolic, something personal, something that belonged to a life that feels impossibly distant now. She looks at it for half a second longer than she should. That pause holds everything she cannot say. Love. Fear, the memory of normal days that no longer exist in any reachable version of time. Then she lets it go, not onto the floor, not openly. She presses it into the seat cushion beside her, forcing it down between fabric and foam, hiding it where it will not be immediately visible but cannot simply disappear. A place where we'll wait. Like her, the car continues moving. The world outside does not know it is now carrying fragments of a story that has not yet finished happening. Denise adjusts her posture again, slightly forward, still compliant in appearance, still surviving in behavior. But internally, something irreversible has shifted. She is no longer only reacting. She is recording. Every moment becomes dual purpose. Every second lived is also being archived in the physical space around her. And that shift does something unexpected inside the vehicle. The man driving begins to change. Subtle at first. A tightening in his movements. A sharper awareness in the way he glances. Not fully at her, but enough to register her presence differently. As if he senses not just fear anymore, but intention. Denise notices it immediately. The danger recalibrates. She slows her breathing again, returning to stillness. But now every stillness carries weight, because she has started doing something he cannot fully see. She is building a case against him inside the car he believes he controls. Outside, the road continues to blur past, trees darkening at the edges of vision, distance stretching in a way that feels less like travel and more like disappearance. Inside, the silence grows sharper. He says nothing. She says nothing. But between them, something unspoken is accelerating. He is beginning to understand, without fully understanding why, that attention is building somewhere beyond the car, that something external is forming around them. Police, signals, fragments of calls he cannot hear. Denise does not know the full picture of what is closing in, but she feels a shift in him, a pressure that was not there before, a hesitation that was not there before. And that hesitation is dangerous, because it means unpredictability, because it means panic is approaching a mind that has been structured around control. Denise keeps her hand still now, but her evidence remains. Hair in the seat seam, the hidden ring pressed deep into fabric, small traces of presence embedded into a space that will outlast motion. She is no longer trying to be rescued through speech alone. She is trying to ensure that even silence will not be enough to erase her. A final glance outside reveals nothing that can save her yet. Only distance, only fading light, only the feeling that whatever destination is coming next has already been chosen without her consent. And still, she remains composed enough that nothing about her outward appearance betrays what has just been done. Not fear, not panic, something far more extraordinary. Control within terror. The kind that does not look like resistance from the outside. The kind that only reveals itself later, when the truth is being reconstructed piece by piece. The car continues forward. The man driving adjusts his route again, subtly, as if responding to thoughts he is not willing to admit even to himself. Denise watches without watching. listens without reacting. And beneath all of it, the evidence remains exactly where she left it, waiting, silent, alive in the only way it can be now. And as darkness begins to spread over Florida, the Camaro moves further from the places that might have saved her and deeper toward the woods where something irreversible is already waiting in the distance. The road narrows as if the world itself is deciding to forget where it goes. Headlights cut through trees now instead of traffic. The sound of civilization fade behind them, replaced by something older, still, watchful. Inside the Camaro, Denise Williams feels a change before she sees it. There is no sudden announcement, no dramatic turn, only the quiet realization that the rhythm of movement has shifted away from anywhere safe. The man driving does not speak. He doesn't need to. The car turns off the main road, deeper into isolation, where the air feels heavier and distances stop being measured in convenience and start being measured in consequences. Denise sits still, but stillness is no longer surrender. It is awareness. Every instinct she has is now working in silence, reading what words cannot explain. The angle of the turn, the lack of passing headlights, the absence of other human presence. And somewhere beneath fear, something even more painful settles in. Understanding. She is running out of time. Not in theory. In reality, the wooded area appears gradually, not like a destination, but like an erasure of everything that came before it. Trees close in. The road becomes uneven. The outside world stops behaving like a place people are meant to be. The Camaro slows, then stops. The engine continues to run for a moment, as if even the machine is reluctant to accept what this place represents. Inside, there are no words exchanged that will ever be recorded, no phrases that will ever reach dispatch, no final call that will connect her to the system that had already been trying and failing to hold her. Only the weight of proximity, of isolation, of being where no one is looking fast enough. Denise remains composed in the only way she still can be, not because she is unafraid, because fear has already evolved into something sharper. Clarity. What happens next is not described in detail, because what matters now is not the mechanics of violence, but the final collapse of distance between hope and silence. Forensic evidence would later show what happened inside that space, the struggle that preceded it, the resistance that continued even when escape was no longer physically possible, a moment where survival and inevitability overlapped so completely that they could no longer be separated in time. A single gunshot, above the eyebrow, a point so precise it becomes part of the record, not the memory. And even then, something far more haunting emerges later from the autopsy findings. Denise did not die immediately. Her body endured for a brief, impossible stretch of time afterward. Seconds that cannot be lived by anyone else. Seconds that exist only as data and implication. Seconds where consciousness and silence overlapped in a way no rescue attempt ever reached. No one was there. No voice answered her. No system reconnected in time. Only the final isolation that had been building since the first misconnection, the first misrouted call, the first fragment that failed to become a whole. The woods do not witness what they take. They only keep it. And inside that silence, the tragedy becomes something larger than the act itself. It becomes the accumulation of every moment that came too late, every decision that required more confirmation, every system that needed more certainty before it was willing to act. Denise Williams does not leave behind confusion. She leaves behind evidence. She leaves behind fragments of resistance that would later speak louder than the silence that followed her. But in that final stretch of time, none of that exists yet. Only the stillness of a place where no help arrives. Only the fading presence of a life that had been speaking, carefully and continuously, into systems that could not assemble her voice fast enough to save her. The Camaro remains in the woods long after everything inside it has already changed forever. And somewhere far away, in rooms filled with radios and screens and delayed understanding, the pieces are still trying to come together. Still not complete. Still not enough. 3 hours after Denise begged dispatchers for help, police finally found the Camaro. The Camaro didn't stop because the world caught up. It stopped because there was nowhere left to go. Headlights sliced through the woods like sudden judgment. Tires crunch over uneven ground. A patrol unit moves in slowly at first, uncertain of what it's about to find, until certain arrives in fragments too disturbing to ignore. The man inside the car is still there. Wet clothes, muddy hands, breathing that does not match the calm of someone who has simply driven too far. And somewhere in that moment, before words are even exchanged, the investigation shifts from searching to knowing. Denise Williams is gone, but the timeline is still alive. Officers pull him out of the vehicle. The door swings open like a break in reality. Inside, nothing looks like violence at first glance, yet everything feels wrong in a way training immediately recognizes but cannot soften. A shovel, soil clinging to metal, a missing phone battery, small objects that stop being ordinary the second they are placed in context. The man does not explain. He does not need to, because the evidence is already beginning to speak louder than he is. Within minutes, the area transforms. Flashlights bloom across the woods. Radios erupt with coordinates. Search teams converge not on uncertainty anymore, but on confirmation that arrives too late to prevent anything, and just early enough to reveal everything. And then something unexpected happens. Denise's father arrives, not as a bystander, but as a man refusing to accept that silence is the final answer. He steps into the search effort, like someone following a voice only he can still hear. Not hope, not denial, something heavier, something that refuses to let distance become disappearance. The search expands under his presence, grid by grid, tree line by tree line, until the ground itself begins to give up what was trying to hide. And then it happens. A location is marked, then confirmed, then surrounded. The earth shifts from terrain to testimony. What is uncovered does not arrive as shock alone, but as accumulation, as if every missing piece has been waiting under the same weight of soil, waiting for time to finally lose. Hair, caught in fabric, embedded where movement had once been. A ring, hidden inside seat cushions, exactly where Denise had pressed it in those final moments of quiet resistance. DNA, on duct tape, on surfaces, on the small, brutal remnants of contact that no darkness could fully erase. Each piece does not just confirm what happened. It reconstructs her presence inside the crime itself, not as a victim who vanished, but as someone who left behind a trail that refused to be erased. Inside the investigation rooms that follow, something begins to shift in how the case is understood. Prosecutors review everything again. The 911 call, the fragmented witness reports. The timeline that once felt chaotic now starts to form a pattern of devastating clarity. Because Denise was not only trying to survive, she was documenting, not in the way people imagine evidence, but in the only way she could access under terror. Her voice, her decisions, the physical traces she left behind inside the vehicle. Every action becomes part of a silent record that survives her. And in court, that record is played back. The 911 audio fills the room first. Her voice again, careful, measured, breaking only in places where fear could not be fully controlled. There is no dramatization in the courtroom, no need for interpretation, just sound and silence in response. Jurors sit still in a way that experienced attorneys later describe as something they rarely witness. Not disbelief, not confusion. Recognition of humanity trapped inside procedure that failed to respond in time. Then the evidence is shown, step by step. Hair, ring, DNA, timeline reconstruction. Every fragment laid out not as separate facts, but as one continuous act of survival that extended beyond her final breath. And slowly, the realization settles over the room. Denise did not only experience the crime, she left behind the architecture of it. Enough to make it undeniable, enough to make denial impossible. When the verdict is read, there is no celebration in the traditional sense. Only wait, guilty, a word that feels too small for everything it is holding. The sentence follows. Death penalty, finality imposed on someone who had already taken finality from another life. But even as the case closes in court, something deeper remains unresolved in the minds of those who followed every step. Because justice here does not feel like an ending. It feels like acknowledgement arriving late enough to be honest, but not late enough to undo what was lost. Denise Williams is no longer a missing person. She is no longer a voice on fragmented calls. She is no longer a set of unanswered coordinates in a failing system. She is a reconstructed truth, built from fragments she left behind when survival was no longer possible. And in that reconstruction, something unexpected emerges. Not just the story of a killer who was caught, but the story of a system that only understood her fully after she was already gone. The courtroom empties. The evidence is sealed. The case becomes part of record. But what remains cannot be contained by verdicts or sentences, because Denise did something no one taught her to do in that moment. She solved her own murder. And the question that follows that realization does not fade with time. It grows heavier, because if she could leave enough behind to prove everything, then how close did everyone come to saving her before it was too late? But Denise's story was bigger than one killer. It exposed a system that nearly let him disappear forever. The calls did not end when the line went dead. They lingered, not in the system that failed her in fragments, but in the minds of the people who later had to replay every second and realize how many chances slipped through their hands while they were still calling a procedure. When the recordings were finally made public in parts, the reaction was not immediate outrage alone. It was something slower, heavier, a delayed understanding that settled into communities, like a bruise that never fully fades. Because the truth of that night was not just that help arrived too late. It was that help was always arriving, just never together. Dispatchers listened again. Officers reviewed timelines again. Citizens heard the 911 call and recognized something deeper than a crime. They recognized a voice trying to stay human inside a situation designed to strip that humanity away. And that is where everything changed. The case did not remain confined to investigation reports or courtroom transcripts. It became a question directed at the entire structure of emergency response itself. How could so many systems be active at once and still fail to form a single moment of rescue? The answer was not simple. It never is, but it was undeniable. The system was not broken in one place. It was fragmented in many, and Denise Williams existed in all of them at once, without ever being fully assembled in time. Out of that realization came change. The Denise Amber Lee Act was born from the aftermath, reshaping how emergency dispatchers are trained, how calls are routed, how urgency is recognized not just as data, but as human distress that must be interpreted correctly the first time. Training began to shift. Protocols were rewritten. Conversations inside dispatch centers changed tone, changed urgency, changed purpose. Because now, every voice on the line carried a memory that could not be ignored. A woman who said her name repeatedly. A woman who said please too many times. A woman who was speaking in fragments because full sentences were no longer safe. Outside the system, grief became movement. Her father stepped into public advocacy not as someone seeking attention, but as someone refusing to let silence be the final interpretation of her life. He spoke in rooms filled with policymakers and first responders, not about statistics, but about seconds, about how close everything came, about how distance is not always measured in miles, but in response to delays that no one sees until it is too late. And in another part of the world she once inhabited, Nathan rebuilt a life that could never return to what it was. He raised their sons in the shadow of a story they would eventually learn not as a headline, but as the absence that shaped everything around them. There is no version of healing that replaces what was taken, only versions that learn how to carry it without collapsing under its weight. And through all of it, Denise remained present in a way no verdict could erase, not as an ending, but as a presence inside the system that once failed her. Because when investigators returned to her case, when they reconstructed every moment, when they layered every call and every fragment of witness testimony together, something undeniable emerged. She had not been passive inside the chaos. She had been persistently active within it, correcting herself, repetition of her name, carefully choosing words under pressure, leaving evidence without knowing if it would ever be found, speaking in ways that allowed truth to survive even when survival itself was no longer possible. And when the hidden 911 call is played now, in training rooms and briefings, it does not sound like confusion anymore. It sounds like resistance, controlled, intentional, human. A voice doing everything it could to reach a world that was not yet aligned enough to receive in time. That is why her story refuses to stay in the past tense. Because Denise Amber Lee is no longer only remembered for what was taken from her. She is remembered for what she revealed while it was still happening. That even inside fear, clarity can exist. Even inside captivity, intelligence can persist. Even inside the worst moments imaginable, a person can still be actively fighting to be understood. And that understanding is what changed everything afterward. The protocols, the training, the awareness, the urgency. Not because the system suddenly became perfect, but because her voice forced it to become more accountable than it had ever been before. In the end, what remains is not only tragedy. It is echo, a reminder embedded in every dispatcher's headset, every emergency line, every decision made in seconds that now carry the weight of memory. Because long after the screaming stopped, Denise Amber Lee's voice kept saving lives.